Dr. Eris Thorne had always believed the universe spoke in a language of mathematics and light, a grand and silent poetry waiting for a translator. She found her life's purpose in listening. On the bridge of the diplomatic station beacon, floating like a silver seed in the void near the star Kepler 126f, she listened with more intent than ever before. Her husband, Ben, stood beside her, his hand a warm, steady presence on the small of her back as he monitored the energy readings from the crystalline world below. Their daughter, 7-year-old Lily, was asleep in their quarters, dreaming of the strange, beautiful aliens her parents had traveled so far to meet. The silicates of Kepler 186f were not creatures of flesh and bone, but beings of living crystal, communicating through intricate pulses of light and harmonic resonance that vibrated through the very hull of the station. For 6 months, Eris had been trying to decipher their transmissions, to find the grammar in their shimmering displays, the syntax in their silent chimes. She believed they were on the brink of the greatest discovery in human history, a true dialogue with a life form so profoundly different from their own, it challenged the very definition of existence. The Interstellar Concord had poured everything into this mission, betting the future of peaceful expansion on Eris's ability to bridge the impossible gap between biology and geology. The silicates were an enigma. They expanded their territory with a slow, inexorable patience, terraforming barren moons into glittering extensions of their home world. They never showed aggression. They simply grew, their crystalline structures sprouting from lifeless rock like frost on a window pane. They were beautiful, Ben had said, like a geological process given intention. Eris agreed, but a sliver of unease had settled deep within her. Their language lacked concepts of individuality, of I or you. It was a collective, a unified chorus that spoke of harmony, integration, and permanence. She was close. She could feel it. The key to it all was a repeating resonant frequency, a master chord that seemed to underpin their entire civilization. That afternoon, she found it, while Ben was calibrating a deep space sensor array and Lily was having a lesson with the ship's AI. Eris isolated the core frequency. When she cross-referenced it with the molecular scans of their crystalline structures, her blood ran cold. It wasn't a word. It was an instruction, a command. The resonant frequency was a blueprint, a catalyst that vibrated organic carbon atoms into a silicon-based lattice. It didn't just communicate, it converted. It was the genetic code for their expansion, the song that taught rock how to become silicate. And she realized with sickening certainty that it could teach flesh to do the same. She scrambled to send a warning to Ben, her fingers fumbling on the console, a frantic message that the harmony they sought was a lie, that it was assimilation, not communication. But she was too late. A single, pure chime echoed through the beacon, a note of such profound beauty and clarity that it seemed to hang in the air like a physical object. The lights on the bridge flickered, and then a wave of iridescent color washed over the forward viewport, emanating from the planet below. It was the master frequency, broadcast with the force of a solar flare. The station's alarms remained silent. There was no attack, no explosion, only a terrible, perfect peace. Through the internal comms, Eris screamed Ben's name, but the channel was dead. She ran from the bridge, a primal terror seizing her as the ship's metallic walls began to shimmer. Fine. crystalline veins branching across their surface like lightning trapped in steel. She saw crew members in the corridor freeze, their eyes wide, not with fear, but with a placid awe as a frost of light crawled up their skin. Their panicked shouts died in their throats as their vocal cords crystallized, their final breaths turning to glittering dust. She had to get to Lily. She ran through a nightmare garden of statues, her former colleagues now silent, shimmering figures, their faces locked in expressions of serene acceptance. She reached their quarters, slamming the door open to see Ben standing over Lily's bed, his back to her. He was humming the chime, his body already half transformed, his arm a sculpture of translucent quartz. He turned, and he had no face, only a smooth, multifaceted surface that pulsed with a soft, internal light. He reached for his daughter, not with malice, but with the gentle certainty of a father tucking his child into bed. Eris saw Lily's eyes open, saw the terror dawn in them for a single, fleeting second before the light from her father's hand touched her forehead. A whimper was all she managed before the crystalline frost consumed her, transforming her small form into a perfect, sleeping statue of crystal. The sight broke something deep inside Ares, shattering her soul into a million pieces. A rogue emergency signal, triggered by a system malfunction as the station's power grid crystallized, blasted an escape pod out of its bay. Eris, thrown backward by the force of the door blowing out, was sucked into the pod by the violent decompression. The hatch sealed automatically, and the small craft was fired into the void. A single desperate seed of life jettisoned from a tomb of silent, beautiful horror. Her last view of the beacon was of a station that no longer looked man-made, but like a complex geode, a monument of crystal and light orbiting a world of silent, singing stone. Her return was not a rescue, it was an interrogation. The Concord Council, a collection of aging politicians and risk-averse bureaucrats from the core worlds, listened to her story with undisguised skepticism. They watched her recordings, the terrifyingly silent footage of the crew's transformation, and saw not an atrocity, but a phenomenon they couldn't afford to understand. Eris, gaunt and hollowed out by grief, her voice raw with fury, tried to explain that the silicates were not peaceful neighbors, but a sentient plague that turned life into a monument for their silent god of order. She showed them the data, the frequency that was a weapon, the language that was a virus. They called it a tragedy, a catastrophic misunderstanding. The loss of the beacon is immeasurable, Dr. Thorne said a flat-faced counselor from Titan, his words dripping with condescension. But we cannot provoke a species we know nothing about. To interpret this conversion as a hostile act is a projection of human fear. Perhaps for them, it is a form of elevation, of immortality. They classified the incident. They suppressed her data, labeling her a hysterical, unreliable witness suffering from deep space psychosis. They offered her condolences and a comfortable medical quarantine on a station orbiting Jupiter, which was nothing more than a gilded cage. They wanted her silence. They chose peace over truth, a cowardice that festered in Aris's soul like a poison. They were afraid of a war they couldn't win, and so they chose to pretend there was no war at all, just a handful of tragic, unavoidable losses in the grand project of interstellar harmony. While the Council debated trade sanctions and sent probes programmed to broadcast greetings of peace, Eris knew that, out in the darkness, the silicate creep continued its silent, patient advance, world by world. In her sterile confinement, grief did not soften Eris. It calcified her. Her sorrow became a cold, hard thing, a diamond of pure rage at the center of her being. She had spoken with words and been ignored. She had offered truth and been silenced. The universe, she now understood, did not listen to poetry. It listened to power. It didn't respond to dialogue. It responded to force. If the silicates communicated through resonance, she would give them a new song to learn, a song of discord, a song of shattered crystal and screaming atoms. Using the station's medical-grade comm systems, she bypassed conquered firewalls, her fury lending her a focus she had never known. She didn't leak her data to the public networks. That would only create panic and debate. She sent it into the shadows, to the darknet channels and encrypted forums of the Outer Rim, to the fringe colonies that the Concord's protection barely reached. Her message was simple, a broadcast that carried no name, only a set of coordinates and a single audio file, the pure, beautiful chime of the silicate master frequency, followed by the sound of a crystal glass shattering, amplified 1,000 times. She didn't ask for soldiers or rebels. She asked for witnesses, for physicists who understood wave theory, for acoustic engineers, for miners who had lost outposts to the crystalline growth on asteroids, for families on frontier worlds who watched the stars with fear instead of wonder. She called to the forgotten, the ignored, the ones who had also seen the silent, beautiful horror and had been told they were imagining things. And in the darkness, they answered. First a trickle, then a flood. Encrypted messages poured in, stories of lost survey teams, of moons that had gone dark, of strange crystalline growths appearing in hydroponic bays. They were the stories the Concord had dismissed as equipment malfunctions and stellar radiation anomalies. They were the echoes of lost worlds. A disgraced physicist from Mars, a rogue cyberneticist from Ceres, a grizzled freight captain who had seen a silicate harvester strip a moon bare in a single cycle. They were all broken, all angry, and all listening. Eris orchestrated her own escape with their help. A digital ghost slipping through the cracks of the Concord's bureaucracy. They spirited her away to a hollowed-out asteroid in the Kuiper Belt, a dead rock that had once been a pirate listening post. There, in the cold and the dark, the echoes were born. The asteroid base was a chaotic symphony of salvaged tech and desperate ingenuity. Cables snaked across cold stone floors, connecting scavenged supercomputers to repurposed mining drills. They weren't an army. They were a ghost faculty of a university that had been erased. Eris was no longer a diplomat. She was a conductor of a dark orchestra. Her life's work, the beautiful and complex language of the silicates, became her focus once more, not to understand, but to undo. Their strength is their unity, she explained to her inner circle, her voice devoid of its former warmth, now a precise, cold instrument. Their entire species is connected by this resonant frequency. They are one mind, one body, one song. If we can introduce a counter-frequency, a dissonance, we can disrupt the connection. We can turn their greatest strength into a fatal weakness. For months they worked, fueled by stale coffee and a burning, collective need for a reckoning. They took the master frequency, the sound that had killed her family, and they inverted it. They layered it with subharmonics and chaotic oscillations, twisting the pure, clean chime into a discordant, agonizing scream of pure sonic entropy. They weren't just building a weapon, they were weaponizing grief itself. They channeled all their loss, their anger, and their helplessness into a single, sustained waveform. Eris stood before the main console of the dissonance projector, a monstrous array of emitters and amplifiers built into the asteroid's core. On the screen, a visualization of the frequency pulsed a jagged, ugly thing full of sharp peaks and broken rhythms. It was the antithesis of the smooth, elegant wave of the silicate language. It was a declaration of war written in the language of physics. She looked at the faces around her, the haunted eyes of the survivors, the grim determination of the engineers. They were all echoes of a life before the silence, and they were about to scream back into the void. She placed her hand on the activation panel. The cold metal, a poor substitute for the warmth of Ben's touch she could barely remember. The idealist who had traveled to Kepler 186f was gone, crystallized and left behind on the bridge of the beacon. In her place stood something new, something hard and sharp, a living echo, ready to shatter the silence. She gave the order, and for the first time, her voice held the resonance of command. Broadcast the signal, give them our reply. The signal, a carrier wave of pure mathematical violence, shot from the heart of the asteroid base and raced across the silent vacuum at the speed of light. On the command deck, a chamber of cold rock and colder screens. There was no sound, only the hum of life support and the faint, anxious clicks of keyboards. Aris stood before the central holotank, a three-dimensional map of the Tantalus system, a remote cluster the Conquered had long since abandoned. Their target was Tantalus the third B, a small moon that had been a barren ice ball until 6 months ago. Now, Concord long-range probes showed it was a burgeoning silicate colony, its surface a latticework of crystalline spires that drank the faint light of its distant star. It was a nursery, a place of quiet, inexorable growth. It was perfect. Kalen, the freight captain whose ship, the Stray Dog, had been the first to join her cause, stood by the comms panel, his face a mask of grim resolve. His family hadn't been on a diplomatic station. They'd been on a mining outpost in the Oort cloud, one that had simply gone silent after reporting strange geological formations on a nearby asteroid. He knew, as Eris did, that silence was the silicate's true weapon. The countdown on the main screen reached 0. Signal impact in 5, 4, 3, 2. The voice of the physicist from Mars, a woman named Lena, was as steady as a metronome. Eris held her breath, her eyes fixed on the tiny, shimmering representation of the moon. Impact. Nothing happened. For a full, agonizing minute, the holographic moon continued to pulse with the soft, internal light of the silicate consciousness. A wave of doubt washed through the room, a collective clenching of jaws. Kalen glanced at Eris, his brow furrowed. Did it work? Aris didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the moon, her mind replaying the complex physics, the wave mechanics, the certainty of her calculations. Her grief was a perfect, unwavering constant. It could not have led her to a flawed equation. Then, a flicker, a single, dark line, a spiderweb crack, appeared on the holographic surface. Another followed, then a dozen, 100, 1,000. The soft, harmonious light within the moon began to stutter, to flash in a frantic, a rhythmic panic. They had introduced a stutter into the eternal song, a flaw in perfection. On the audio feed from their long-range sensor drone, a sound began to register, something that should have been impossible in the vacuum of space. It was the whisper of a billion fractures, the sound of a world-sized crystal breaking from the inside out, transmitted not as sound waves, but as a storm of electromagnetic interference. The pure chime of the Silicate Collective was being drowned out by the shriek of Eris's grief. The destruction was both total and terrifyingly beautiful. The spires of the moon, which had grown in perfect geometric harmony, began to collapse. They didn't explode. They disintegrated, shattering into clouds of razor-sharp dust that caught the starlight like a blizzard of diamonds. The entire surface of the moon seemed to contract, to shudder in a final, silent convulsion before it fell apart. The internal light of the silicate consciousness, the unified glow of their collective mind, went out, not all at once, but in patches, like a dying city grid, until only the cold, dead rock remained, shrouded in a glittering funeral veil of its own remains. The command deck was silent. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The only sound was a long, slow exhale from Lena as she slumped against her console. Eris felt a tremor in her hands and clenched them into fists, her knuckles white. She had just overseen the annihilation of an entire world's worth of life. She had wanted vengeance, a reckoning, a scream back into the silence that had taken her family. She had gotten it, and she felt nothing. The gaping void inside her was not filled, only echoed by the new emptiness she had just created in the cosmos. She had hoped for catharsis, for a moment of peace, but all she found was the cold, hard certainty of her own capacity for destruction. She looked at Kaylin, and, for the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in the veteran captain's eyes. Not fear of the silicates, but fear of her. He had signed on to fight monsters, but he was beginning to suspect he was following one. "Status report," Eris said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a shard of glass. "Confirm total cessation of the silicate resonant frequency." Lena, composing herself, tapped at her console. "Frequency is gone." Eris, the moon is inert. Just a debris field. We did it. Eris nodded once, a sharp, clinical motion. "Good. Kaylin, take the stray dog out for a close-range scan. I want a full spectral analysis of that debris. I want to know exactly what we've killed." Kaylin hesitated. "The Concord will have detected that energy release. Their patrols will be on high alert. Getting that close is a risk." "It's a necessary one," Eris countered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We hit them with a theory. Now I need empirical data. We don't know if this is a permanent solution or if they can reform. We don't know anything until we see the pieces up close. Go." Kaylin held her gaze for a moment, then gave a curt nod. The captain in him recognized a direct order, even if the man in him was unsettled by the cold fire in her eyes. He turned and left the command deck, his heavy boots echoing in the sudden silence. Aris turned back to the holotank, where the shimmering representation of Tantalus the Threadby had been replaced by a static cloud of digital dust. She had broken their song. Now she had to learn if they could sing a new one. Kaylin piloted the stray dog through the Tantalus system under full stealth, the ship a ghost of cold metal and silenced emissions. His co-pilot, a young tech named Jax who had lost his parents on a terraforming project that went dark, kept his eyes glued to the sensor screen, his face pale in the green glow. As they approached the coordinates of the shattered moon, the ship's gravimetric sensors began to scream. "What the hell is that?" Jax muttered, his fingers flying across the console. The debris field has a gravitational signature, but it's wrong. It's not a unified mass. It's thousands of tiny, independent fields, all pulling against each other. Kalen brought the ship to a careful halt at the edge of the glittering cloud. On the main view screen, the wreckage of the moon was a breathtaking, terrifying sight. It wasn't dust. It was a swarm. Billions of crystalline fragments, from the size of a fist to the size of a freighter, were tumbling and spinning in a chaotic, mesmerizing dance. But it wasn't a random dance. They were moving with purpose. "Magnify Sector Gamma 9, Kalen ordered, his voice low. The screen zoomed in on a cluster of larger shards. They were sharp, jagged, and impossibly black, absorbing all light. And they were hunting. As Kalen and Jax watched, a smaller fragment drifted too close to a larger one. The larger shard suddenly extended a needle-thin tendril of crystal, impaled the smaller piece, and seemed to absorb it. The larger shard glowed briefly with a faint, angry red light before returning to its unnatural blackness. "My God," Jax whispered. "They're not dead." Kalen felt a cold dread snake up his spine. "No," he said, his knuckles white on the controls. "They're just hungry." He opened a secure comms channel back to the asteroid base. "Eris, it's Kalen. We have a problem. You didn't just break them apart. You atomized their consciousness. The hive is gone, but the insects are still here. They're no longer collective. They're individuals. And they're fighting each other, consuming each other." A burst of static, and then Aris's voice came through, as cold and clear as deep space. "Define individuals." "Kalen, are they sentient?" "I don't know about sentient." Kalen shot back, his voice tight with alarm, as he swerved the stray dog to avoid a shard that was suddenly accelerating toward them. "But they're predatory. They're acting on instinct. Pure, simple survival. You haven't killed the organism. Eris, you've just shattered it into a million angrier, more chaotic pieces. We've traded a glacier for an avalanche." There was a long pause on the other end. Kalen could picture her standing there, processing this new, horrific data not as a failure, but as another variable in her grand equation. He was right. When she spoke again, her voice held not a trace of fear, but a chilling spark of intellectual curiosity. "Interesting. A unified mind, when fractured, defaults to a state of competitive anarchy. Their greatest strength, their unity, has become a billion individual weaknesses. They're disorganized, predictable. They can be herded. They can be exterminated, piece by piece." Kalen couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Exterminated Eris. This is a swarm of planet-killer debris that is actively hostile. We've created a new plague. We need to fall back. Reassess." "Negative, Captain," Eris replied, and the title felt like a deliberate reassertion of her authority. "This is not a plague. This is an opportunity. A predictable, unified enemy is dangerous. A chaotic, fractured enemy that is busy eating itself is a gift. We are not falling back. We are escalating. Send me all your data. We're choosing our next target." The line went dead. Kalen stared out at the swirling chaos of crystalline predators, a monster of their own making, and realized the truth. Eris wasn't trying to save humanity anymore. She wasn't even seeking vengeance. She was conducting an experiment, and the entire galaxy was her laboratory. The woman who had gone into the void to translate a poem was now intent on erasing every last word, and she would sacrifice anyone and anything to finish her work. The real war, he understood with a sickening certainty, had only just begun. The Concord was not blind. The energy signature from the fracturing of Tantalus Etheridae B was a scream in the quiet of deep space, an anomaly so violent it couldn't be ignored. Admiral Julian Thorne, a man whose weary eyes had seen too many brush-fire wars on the fringes of human space, stood on the bridge of the flagship Vigilance and watched the spectral data bloom across the main screen. The readouts were gibberish, a simultaneous energy release characteristic of a nova event, combined with the gravitational chaos of a planetary collapse, yet localized to a single, insignificant moon. It was a contradiction, a physical impossibility. He was Eris Thorne's older brother. He had been the one to argue against her assignment to the beacon, not because he doubted her brilliance, but because he knew the fire in her. A fierce, uncompromising idealism that left no room for the gray realities of the universe. When the beacon went silent and Aris returned as the sole, traumatized survivor, he had watched from afar as the Concord Council wrapped her in sterile sympathy and buried her truth under layers of bureaucracy. He had wanted to intervene, to use his influence, but he was a military man, and the Concord's diplomatic arm held sway. Now, staring at this impossible data, he felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This was her, the ghost of his sister, the brilliant linguist who had been so thoroughly silenced, was now speaking in a language the entire galaxy would be forced to understand, the language of force. "Run a comparative analysis," Julian commanded, his voice a low rumble that cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. "Cross-reference the energy signature with every known weapon system, theoretical or applied. And I want the complete, unredacted psychological profile of Dr. Eris Thorne on my private terminal." Now, his second-in-command, a sharp, young officer named Eva Rostova, hesitated. "Sir, Doctor, Thorne's file is classified Level 9. The Council sealed it." Julian turned, his gaze as hard and unyielding as the warship's armored hull. "Commander, I have a fleet of 10 cruisers, a carrier, and 30,000 souls under my command. And we are sitting on the edge of a system where a moon just evaporated. The Council can court-martial me when we get back. Get me the file." As Julian read through the suppressed reports, the interrogations, and Eris's frantic, desperate warnings about the silicate's resonant frequency, the impossible data from Tantalus began to make a terrifying kind of sense. She hadn't used a bomb. She had weaponized their own biology against them. She had turned their song into a shriek. This wasn't a military strike. It was a targeted act of biological warfare on a planetary scale, executed with a physicist's precision and a grieving widow's fury. A priority alert flashed on his terminal. It was a deep space listening post on the edge of conquered territory, an automated station designed to monitor for unusual transmissions. It had just intercepted a series of encrypted, tight beam communications originating from the Kuiper Belt. The decryption algorithms were struggling, but one fragment had been unscrambled. It was a star chart. At its center was the Kepler 186 system, the silicate homeworld. "Ha-helm!" Julian barked, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "Set a course for Kepler 186, maximum burn, and send a message to the Council. Inform them that I am invoking Emergency Protocol 72. I am assuming full operational authority to investigate a potential xenocidal threat. My authority, not theirs." Eva Rostova's eyes went wide. Protocol 72 was a relic of the expansion era, a last resort measure that granted a fleet admiral near dictatorial power in the face of an imminent existential threat. It hadn't been invoked in over a century. "Sir," she stammered, "that protocol gives you the authority to engage a non-human species without council approval. It's a declaration of war." "No, Commander," Julian said, his gaze fixed on the star-dusted void on the view screen. "It's a declaration of quarantine. I'm not going there to fight the silicates. I'm going there to stop my sister." Back on the asteroid, Eris had become a creature of pure, cold logic. The grief was still there, a singularity at the core of her being, but she had learned to orbit it, to draw power from its immense gravitational pull without falling in. The data from Kalen's reconnaissance mission had confirmed her hypothesis. The dissonance wave didn't just kill. It fundamentally altered. It shattered the collective consciousness, forcing the silicates into a devolved, predatory state. They were no longer a unified intelligence. They were a mindless swarm. But a swarm could still spread. "They're moving," Lena said, her voice tight with tension as she pointed to the holotank. The glittering cloud of debris that was once Tantalus 3 sub was no longer static. It was drifting, shedding fragments like seeds on a solar wind, pushed by the light pressure of the system's star. Some of those fragments will eventually be captured by the gravity of the system's other planets. It's a slower method of expansion, but it's still expansion. We haven't contained them. We've just changed how they spread. Eris stared at the simulation, her mind already 3 steps ahead. The Concord would have seen the event. They would be sending a fleet, but they would be cautious, slow, bogged down by debate and procedure. They would investigate, analyze, and by the time they understood the threat, the fractured silicate shards would have already infested the system like a virus. There was only one solution, a final, definitive statement. Their capacity for regeneration is a function of their proximity to a primary resonant source, Eris stated, more to herself than to her team. The home world, Kepler 186f. It's the tuning fork that keeps the entire species in harmony. If we shatter the tuning fork, the song stops everywhere, permanently. Kalen, who had just returned from his harrowing mission, stepped forward, his face pale with exhaustion and dread. "Eris, you can't be serious. That's their home. A fully developed, ancient world. We don't have the power to destroy a planet. We don't need to destroy it," Eris corrected, her eyes glowing with an almost religious fervor. "We just need to silence it. We'll recalibrate the dissonance wave. We won't broadcast a shattering frequency. We'll broadcast a canceling frequency, a wave of pure, absolute silence on their resonant band. We will create a dead zone around their world, so profound it will sever the connection to all their colonies. Everywhere, the shards in the Tantalus system will become inert. The creep on other worlds will halt. We won't kill them all. We'll just unplug them, isolate them, leave them trapped in their own silent home." It was, in its own way, a brilliant and terrifyingly elegant solution. It wasn't genocide. It was imprisonment on a planetary scale. It was a punishment that fit the crime, forcing the silent, assimilating collective into a state of total, eternal isolation. But there was a problem. The power requirements for a broadcast of that magnitude, sustained long enough to create a permanent dead zone. It's impossible. Lena argued, shaking her head. We'd have to drain the core of a star. We don't need a star, Eris said, turning to Kalen. We just need a ship with a powerful enough engine core, one capable of a sustained, massive energy output. Everyone in the room understood. She was talking about a Concord-class dreadnought, a military warship. There was only one way to get that kind of power. Kalen's blood ran cold. No, absolutely not. Eris, we're not pirates. We're not terrorists. We can't attack a Concord fleet. Eris turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw the full, unshielded force of the abyss in her eyes. They took my daughter, she said, her voice a low, trembling whisper of pure, distilled pain. They stood by and let a silent, beautiful monster turn my little girl into a glass statue. They chose peace over justice. They chose comfort over truth. Their ships, their power, their laws, they are all instruments of a cowardly silence. I am simply going to borrow one of those instruments and use it to create a silence of my own. A silence that matters. She turned back to the holotank. Her decision made. Begin planning the intercept. We will take a conquered warship, and we will use it to end this war. Kalen looked around the room at the other members of the Echoes. He saw the doubt, the fear, the dawning realization that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. They had followed Eris because she was a victim, a brilliant mind fighting an unimaginable evil. But now, she was becoming something else. They were no longer just fighting the silicates. Now, they were going to war with humanity itself. And in a war between a monster you know and a monster you created. He was no longer sure which side he was on. The Vigilance sliced through the void, a silent behemoth of gray metal and contained fury. On the bridge, a tense, coiled silence reigned, broken only by the soft chimes of system updates and the low hum of the ship's singularity core. Admiral Julian Thorne stood before the holotank, not looking at the star charts, but at a grainy, frozen image of his sister. It was from a family gathering years ago, before the beacon, before everything. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes alight with a fierce, intellectual joy. He was trying to find that woman in the cold, strategic phantom he was now hunting. We're 2 hours from the Tantalus system. Admiral, Ava Rostova reported, her voice crisp and professional, betraying none of the tension that thrummed through the very deck plates. Long-range scans are still showing chaos. The debris field is propagating. We've logged over 200 shard impact events on the system's other moons. They're behaving like an invasive species. Julian nodded grimly. They're seeds. She's not just destroying, she's sowing. She's using their own biology to create a weaponized, chaotic ecosystem. His mind raced, trying to anticipate her next move. She had proven her concept at Tantalus. Now she would want to scale it up. She would go for the source, Kepler 186F. But she couldn't do it with the salvage tech she had on that asteroid. She needed power, real power, and there was only one place to get that in the deep black. A flash of insight, cold and terrible, struck him. She wasn't running from him. She was waiting for him. Helm, bring us to a full stop, he commanded, his voice sharp with sudden urgency. The navigations officer looked up. confused. "Sir, now, Lieutenant!" Julian's command staff exchanged uneasy glances. Stopping a fleet dead in the water 2 hours from a potential hostile zone was a tactical anomaly, a move that reeked of indecision. But Julian's face was a mask of cold certainty. He wasn't indecisive, he was recalibrating. "Get me a full spectrum scan of the surrounding space. I want every asteroid, every dust cloud, every gravimetric anomaly mapped and analyzed. She's out here. She's hunting." Ava stepped forward. "Admiral, with all due respect, our long-range sensors are clean. There's nothing out here but empty space and residual radiation from the Tantalus event." "Empty space is the best place to hide, Commander," Julian said, his eyes scanning the tactical display. "She knows Concord Fleet doctrine. She knows we'll come in fast and hard to assess the threat. She knows our protocols, our formations. She knows me. She wouldn't expect us to stop. She'd expect us to fly right into her arms." He tapped a section of the display, a seemingly empty patch of blackness dotted with a few minor asteroid clusters. "Focus the deep scan array on these coordinates. Run a passive energy absorption scan. Look for a heat sink that's too cold, a gravity field that's too perfect." He was betting on a ghost, on a whisper of a possibility born from a lifetime of knowing the brilliant, stubborn, and ruthlessly logical mind of his sister. For 10 agonizing minutes, the bridge was a tomb of silent concentration as the Vigilance's powerful sensors drank in the darkness. Then, a single, quiet beep echoed from the sensor station. "Sir," the sensor tech said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have something. A thermal anomaly. It's negative. An object in the Odysseus cluster is radiating less heat than the surrounding vacuum. It's actively scrubbing its own emissions." Julian's jaw tightened. "That's them. She's using a stealth field powered by a thermoelectric generator, hiding her heat by turning it into power. It's brilliant. It's arrogant. It's Aris." He turned to Ava, the ghost of his sister in the family photo replaced by the cold reality of the enemy commander he now faced. Sound battle stations, all ships, power weapons, and raise shields. We are approaching a hostile force of unknown capability. And, Commander, he added, his voice dropping to a low, somber tone, target their engines, not their life support. I want to take my sister alive. On the command deck of the asteroid, the atmosphere was thick with a mutinous dread. Eris stood before them, a prophet of a new, silent age, and laid out her plan to ambush the conquered fleet, disable a dreadnought, and seize its engine core. It was not a request, it was a decree. "You're insane," Kalen said, his voice raw. He wasn't the only one. The faces around him were a mixture of disbelief and open fear. "That's the Concord flagship, the Vigilance. It's commanded by Admiral Thorne, her own brother. You want us to fire on family. Family is a luxury I no longer have." "Captain," Aris replied, her voice as cold as the void outside, "Julian is an instrument of the system that condemned my daughter to a silent, crystalline eternity. He will follow his orders. He will try to stop me. He is an obstacle, and I will remove him." "This isn't what we signed up for," a young engineer shouted from the back. "We came here to fight the silicates, not to start a civil war." "The war has already started," Eris countered, her voice rising with a terrible, messianic power. Concord's silence in the face of annihilation was the first shot. They chose to let humanity be assimilated rather than risk a conflict. Their peace is a lie, a comfortable shroud they pull over a mass grave. We are not terrorists. We are the immune response the body politic was too weak to muster on its own. We will take their ship, and we will use their power to achieve a true, lasting peace, the peace of silence, the peace of a universe free from the creeping. Crystalline blight. Her words hung in the air, a potent mixture of righteous fury and cold fanaticism. She had framed their mutiny not as an act of aggression, but as one of necessity, of righteous survival. She had given their fear a new name: courage. Kalen watched as the doubt in the room began to waver, replaced by a grim, reluctant resolve. He saw the trap she had laid for them, the same one she had laid for herself, by making the enemy so absolute, so monstrous. Any action taken against them became justifiable. He knew he should fight her, should try to pull them back from this precipice. But he also knew it was too late. The ghost of his own family, lost to the Concord's inaction, whispered in his ear, silencing his dissent. He was as trapped by his grief as she was by hers. A klaxon suddenly blared, a jarring, electronic scream that shattered the tense quiet. Proximity alert! Lena yelled from her console. The Concorde fleet, they've stopped. They're 10 million kilometers out and holding position. They're scanning us. Aris's face hardened. A flicker of something surprised respect crossed her features. Julian, she whispered to herself. He hadn't flown into the trap. He had anticipated it. He knew her. The predator had just realized the prey was hunting it back. They see us. Kalen stated the obvious, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his belt. They'll launch fighters. They'll tear this rock apart. No, Aris said, her mind already adapting, her strategy shifting in a fraction of a second. They won't risk destroying the dissonance projector. He knows what it is, what it can do. He'll want to capture it, and me. He'll send a boarding party. She turned to Kalen, her eyes burning with a cold, clear fire. And that is how we will take his ship. The battle, when it came, was not a grand, sweeping affair of starship cannons and explosive decompression. It was a brutal, greased close-quarters fight in the cold. Dark tunnels of a dead rock. The echoes were not soldiers, but they were desperate. And they were fighting on their home ground. They'd turned the asteroid into a labyrinth of traps, remote detonated mining charges, and kill zones. The Concorde Marines were disciplined, heavily armed, and expertly trained. But they were walking into a hornet's nest. Julian watched from the bridge of the Vigilance, his face a stone carving of anguish as he listened to the comms chatter from his boarding teams, shouts, weapons fire, the hiss of breached vacuum suits, and then, too often, silence. Every casualty report was a fresh wound. These were his people, dying in the dark because of a war his sister had started. They've sealed off the primary access tunnel to the command center, Ava reported, her voice strained. Major Corrigan's team is pinned down. They're asking for permission to use heavy explosives to breach the bulkhead. Julian clenched his fist. Heavy explosives could damage the dissonance projector, the very weapon he was trying to secure, but his Marines were being slaughtered. Grant it, he bit out. Get them through that door. Aboard the asteroid. The explosion rocked the command center. Kalen, bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his arm, looked at Ares. They're coming through. It's over. No, Ares said. a strange, serene calm settling over her. It's just beginning. She tapped a final command into her console. Throughout the asteroid, a new signal was broadcast. Not the dissonance wave, but a simple, automated transmission. It was a Trojan horse, a virus coded into a surrender message. "Lena," Eris commanded, "overload the projector's power core. Full meltdown. Now." Lena looked at her, horrified. "That will destroy the entire asteroid, us included. We are not the mission," Eris said, her voice soft. "The silence is." As the Concorde Marines finally blasted through the command center door, they found it empty, save for a single console displaying a countdown timer. On the bridge of the Vigilance, a communications officer suddenly shouted, "Sir, we're receiving a surrender message from the asteroid. It's patching itself directly into our primary command systems." Before Julian could react, the Trojan horse virus hit. The lights on the Vigilance bridge flickered and died, plunging them into the dim, red glow of emergency lighting. Screens went black, replaced by a single, shimmering crystalline symbol, the mark of the silicates. Then, Aris's voice, amplified through every speaker on the ship, echoed through the bridge. "Checkmate, brother." A second alert screamed through the ship, this one from engineering. "Admiral, the asteroid's power core is going critical. Meltdown in 90 seconds. The blast radius will vaporize this ship." Panic erupted. Julian, however, was frozen, staring at the crystalline symbol on his screen. She hadn't been trying to win a battle. She had been creating a diversion, as his fleet was focused on the asteroid. A small, stealth-modified freighter, Kalen's stray dog, had silently detached from the rock and was now accelerating away, heading not for the safety of deep space, but directly for the crippled, blind flagship of the conquered fleet. She hadn't tried to take his ship with force. She had tricked him into leaving it defenseless, and now she was coming to claim it. The asteroid detonated in a flash of soundless, incandescent rage. Its death cry, a wave of hard radiation and vaporized rock. From the bridge of the Vigilance, the explosion was a beautiful, terrible flower blooming in the dark, its petals of plasma momentarily eclipsing the distant stars. It was a funeral pyre for the echoes who had remained behind. A final, fanatical sacrifice to their cold priestess. But Julian Thorne had no time to mourn the men and women his sister had just martyred. His ship was a wounded beast, blind and adrift. Red emergency lights bathed the bridge in a blood-hued twilight, and the only sound was the frantic shouting of damage control teams and the insistent, shrieking alarm of a proximity alert. On the main screen, the crystalline icon of the silicates had been replaced by a docking camera feed showing the ugly, utilitarian form of the stray dog clamped onto their hull like a remora on a dying shark. The virus Eris had unleashed was a masterpiece of digital warfare, a surgical strike that hadn't just cut their communications, but had severed the ship's entire central nervous system. They were flying blind, their weapons offline, their internal sensors a mess of ghost signals and dead zones. "They're in." Ava Rostova's voice was tight, her face a pale oval in the crimson gloom. Life support readings are fluctuating in sectors 7 through 9. They're moving fast. Julian's mind, trained for fleet-scale strategy, was forced into the brutal, intimate calculus of a knife fight in a dark room. Eris wasn't coming for the bridge. A ship is not its brain. It is its heart. Engineering. He breathed, the word tasting like ash. She's going for the singularity core. He turned, his admiral's uniform feeling like a useless costume. "Ava, lock down the bridge. No one in or out. Muster a security detail, Royal Guard only. We're going to meet them." He drew his sidearm, the weight of it both unfamiliar and grimly appropriate. This wasn't an admiral's duty. This was a brother's reckoning. The corridors of the Vigilance were a nightmare of flickering lights and echoing alarms. A metal maze where Eris was the ghost, and her grief was the Minotaur. She moved with Kaelin and a handful of her most loyal, desperate followers, their faces grim under tactical helmets. They were not an invading army. They were a scalpel, aimed at the ship's heart. They met resistance. Pockets of bewildered crew members and security officers who fought with courage but without coordination. The fight was brutal, chaotic, and short. Eris did not kill. She had left that to the others. Her role was singular, her focus absolute. She moved through the firefights like a phantom, her eyes fixed on a destination only she could truly see. Her expression one of unnerving, placid certainty. Kaelin fought beside her, his rifle barking in the narrow confines. But he wasn't fighting for her cause anymore. He was fighting out of a grim, exhausted loyalty. A final duty to the woman whose all-consuming sorrow had swept him up and carried him to this impossible place. He looked at her and no longer saw a brilliant scientist or a grieving mother. He saw a force of nature, a living equation moving inexorably toward its terrible, logical conclusion. They reached the massive blast doors of engineering, sealed and impassable. "They know we're here," Kaelin said, reloading his weapon. "It's a choke point." Eris simply placed a hand on the door, her fingers tracing the cold steel. "The virus didn't just blind them," she said, her voice a low hum. "It gave me the keys." She pulled a datapad from her belt and interfaced with the door's control panel. A string of incomprehensible code scrolled across the screen. With a groan of tortured metal, the multi-ton blast doors slid open. They stepped into the cathedral of power that was the engine room. In the center of the vast chamber, suspended in a web of magnetic containment fields, pulsed the Singularity Core, a captive black hole. A tear in space-time no bigger than a fist, from which the ship drew its life. Its quiet, gravitational hum was the true heartbeat of the Vigilance, and its power was near infinite. It was here, in this temple of man-made physics, that she would deliver her sermon of silence. But the room was not empty. Standing before the core's primary control console was Julian, his face etched with a pain that went deeper than war. He was alone. "That's far enough, Eris." Julian's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a fleet. It was not the voice of an admiral, but of an older brother who had once taught his sister how to ride a bicycle. Eris stopped, her gaze fixed not on him, but on the Singularity. "Hello, Julian. I was wondering if you'd have the courage to face me yourself." "This isn't courage," he said, taking a step forward. "It's grief. I'm here because I failed you. The Concord failed you. But this is not the answer. You've become a monster. Aris, you're killing people who had nothing to do with what happened to you." "They had everything to do with it," she snapped, her voice finally breaking its cold composure, cracking with the agony beneath. "And their silence was their consent. Their peace was paid for with my daughter's life. I am not a monster. I am the consequence. I am the bill for a debt this galaxy refused to pay." She began to walk toward the console, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. And now I will pay it in full. I will use this cord to broadcast a signal that will sever the silicate's connection to their home world, to their very consciousness. I will turn their greatest weapon, their unity, into a prison, a silent, eternal quarantine. And you'll destroy this ship to do it. Julian stated, his eyes pleading with her. My crew, your own people. Kalen, yourself. For what? So the universe can be as empty as you feel, for the first time. Eris looked at him, and he saw the bottomless, lightless void in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. That is exactly it. It is the only justice left. Kalen, standing by the doorway, lowered his rifle. He saw the truth then. This was never a suicide mission. It was just a suicide. Julian raised his pistol. I can't let you do it. Aris. She gave him a sad, pitying smile. I know. She moved with a speed that defied her grief, a blur of motion. It wasn't a fight. It was a disarming. She twisted his wrist, the pistol clattering to the deck. She struck him once. A precise, devastating blow to his temple with the butt of her own weapon. He crumpled to the floor, not dead, but unconscious. A final, bitter mercy. She knelt beside him for a moment, her fingers brushing his hair. I'm sorry, she murmured to his sleeping form. But your peace was too quiet. Mine will be absolute. Kalen watched, his heart a cold, dead weight in his chest. Eris stood and turned to him. Leave. Kalen, take the stray dog and go. Live. Someone needs to be left to tell them why this had to happen. He shook his head. I can't just leave you. You can, she said, her voice softening, a ghost of the woman she once was. This is my ending. It doesn't have to be yours. Go. She turned her back on him and began the final sequence at the core's control console. Kalen stood frozen for a moment, caught between loyalty and survival, between a past he couldn't change and a future he didn't want. He looked at the unconscious admiral, then at the woman who was about to unravel the very fabric of space, and made his choice. He turned and ran, from the bridge of the stray dog, a safe distance away. Kalen watched the end. The vigilance did not explode. Instead, it began to glow, a brilliant, piercing white light emanating from its engineering section. It was no longer a warship. It had become a star, a man-made sun, broadcasting a single, impossible note of anti-resonance into the cosmos. The dissonance wave, powered by the death of a singularity, was a silent, invisible tsunami that raced across the parsecs. Kalen watched the star charts, his ship's sensors linked to the Concorde's deep space network. As the wave washed over the Kepler 186 system, the change was subtle, yet absolute. The vibrant, harmonious light of the silicate home world did not shatter. It simply went out. The living curdle of the planet turned dull, its internal light extinguished, its song silenced forever. Across the galaxy, every shard of the silicate creep, every crystalline growth on every forgotten moon, went inert at the exact same moment. The vibrant, expanding life form became nothing more than a collection of strange, dead minerals. The plague was cured. The war was over. Aris Thorn, in her final, terrible act, had saved humanity. She had traded her life, her brother's ship, and what was left of her soul for a universe free of the silent. Beautiful horror. The galaxy was safe, and it was silent. Years passed. The Thorn anomaly, as the dead zone around Kepler 186f came to be known, was a scar on the heavens, a permanent reminder of the war that was never officially fought. The Concorde, humbled and broken by the revelation of its own cowardice, was restructured. Admiral Julian Thorne, when he recovered, did not seek vengeance. He sought understanding. He dedicated the rest of his life to building a new Concorde, one that listened to its Cassandras, one that valued truth over comfort. He never spoke of his sister as a terrorist, but as a tragic, necessary catalyst for change. Kalen never returned to the core worlds. He took his ship to the Outer Rim and became a storyteller, a wandering keeper of a truth too complicated for official histories. On quiet nights, in the smoky bars of forgotten space stations, he would tell the tale of a woman who loved the universe's poetry so much that when she found a verse she could not translate, she chose to burn the entire book. He would tell them that peace had been won, but that it was a hollow, haunted peace. The universe was quiet now. The stars were beautiful, full of silence and promise, but it was no longer the silence of a grand, undiscovered poetry. It was the silence of a final, unanswered question, the silence of a room where a child used to laugh, the profound and eternal silence that follows a scream. It was the silence Aris had bought for them all. It was the price of her grief.